Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world today, and welcome to Ad Age's custom webcast sponsored by Zenreach. The topic of today's webcast is why brick-and-mortar stores are the best weapon for e-commerce. I'm Christopher Hosford with the Ad Age team, and I'm your moderator today. We have just a few quick items to go over before we begin. Well, we'll hear from our today's presenters, and then we'll open the floor to your questions. So to participate in the Q&A portion of the webcast, all you have to do is type your question into the Ask a Question text area, and then click the Send button. Pretty simple. You can submit your questions at any time during the webcast, and we'll address as many questions as time permits after our presenters' prepared remarks. Now, let's get started. Our presenters today include Kai Umezawa. Kai is Zenreach's Vice President of Product. The network he helped build now includes tens of millions of users and drove more than 7.7 million walkthroughs in 2018. Before co-founding Zenreach, he worked at Google and Facebook, and previous to that, he attended the University of Waterloo, where he studied systems design engineering. We also have Kapil Mohan, who's the product manager of ads at Zenreach. He's got extensive experience in ad tech and martech, and prior to joining Zenreach, he worked in various roles in product, ops, analytics, and research at companies like Quantcast and Clorox. Kapil holds a degree in economics from the University of Southern California. Kai, I believe you're up first, so take it away.
Thank you so much, Christopher, and to the whole Ad Age team. Kapil and I are really excited to share some of our insights today. We have a handful of different topics that we want to cover, and at a high level, we'll start with discussing how we've learned that real-world stores are driving a lot of online business. We at Zenreach have been partnering with brands who use digital to drive in-store sales for quite some time, but we want to introduce a new concept today, which is that your in-store traffic and data are a critical element to also drive digital results as well. We'll talk about why this is a challenge for brick-and-mortar, and particularly the blind spot that exists in brick-and-mortar for omnichannel retailers. We'll talk about different ways in which you can overcome those challenges to measure in-store visit behavior and use in-store data to drive digital outcomes. And then finally, I'll hand it back over to Kapil, who will cover a few different strategies and opportunities that we see different brands and advertisers in the market utilizing today to leverage their brick-and-mortar stores to drive digital results. And of course, we'll wrap up with what we hope is a helpful Q&A period at the end. I wanted to start our conversation today by highlighting some of the ways that a retail footprint can impact digital sales. With the growth of digital advertising and e-commerce over the past few years, a lot has been written about the infamous online to offline problem. In other words, people using digital marketing to drive in-store results and not being sure whether or not that digital marketing is driving retail foot traffic. But what's not being written about a lot today is the commerce that's flowing in the other direction. So commerce that starts in the store but ultimately ends up online. And because that's not being written about, I think that folks are missing out on a huge opportunity to use their brick-and-mortar presence. And some of this can be highlighted in some studies and data that we've come across. The first thing that's probably most surprising to folks is that in a new market for a brand that's already operating an e-commerce store or presence or has some sort of digital presence, opening a new store in a market can actually increase the website traffic to that brand in that market by 37% on average, which is huge. And again, if you think about it, it makes sense. Folks in that market will be more aware of your brand. They might see your brand as they're walking down the street. They might see other consumers in the market walking around with your brand either on a bag or something of that nature. And so it makes sense that opening a brick-and-mortar store will raise awareness of your brand in a market, and as a result of that will also drive more website traffic as well. The other thing that we see is it can also be helpful as a brand to really penetrate the market as well. So for a brand in a new market, introducing a new store location can also improve their share of web traffic in a particular category by 27%. So it makes sense that if you are in a competitive category in markets where your e-commerce and digital business might not be doing so well or might not be doing as well as you'd like relative to some of your competitors, one way that you can really start to move the needle is actually to have a physical presence in that market. And it makes sense that that physical presence would result in offline sales in your retail stores, but will also have the benefit of improving your share on web traffic and digital traffic as well. The other thing that is worth mentioning and that we always try to remind everyone of at Zenreach is while everyone is talking about e-commerce, for a lot of omnichannel brands, if you have a physical store in a market, over 84% of your customers will have shopped in one at one point or another. So while they might be doing a portion of their shopping online or a portion of their interactions with your service online, if you do have a brick-and-mortar store in a given market, it's highly, highly likely that your customers are not just interacting with you online, but are also interacting with you in the physical world as well. And again, one way to look at this to be sure that it really is the brick-and-mortar stores that are driving this traffic is that studies show that the inverse is also true. So in a market where you remove a physical retail presence, you'll also see all the associated digital metrics move in the same direction as well. And so there does seem to be a very clear tie between physical world business and the impact that it's having on digital results. One of the reasons why this is so clearly the case is if you think about the retail experience, it has some very unique advantages in the real world, and particularly it has some advantages in the face-to-face impact that your brand can establish with customers. When surveyed, 85% of customers say they prefer to shop in store. Indeed, again, even with the growth of e-commerce, we still see that 89% of retail sales happen in store. And not only are more sales happening in store still today, but customers are actually spending more in store than they would online. And if you take a step back and think about why that might be, it's that I think brick-and-mortar stores today have become underappreciated in how effective they are at doing brand and product marketing, right? A brick-and-mortar store is essentially a massive billboard in the real world for your brand that people who are highly relevant prospects for your brand in market are going to be seeing all the time as they walk past in their neighborhoods. But in addition to that, if they walk in, it's also one of the best product marketing experiences that they can possibly have. They can come in, they can see your product, they can touch it, they can feel it, they can speak to your salespeople, they can really get to know your products, understand your brand, understand how you're different than other brands in the market. And so it's a very, very unique experience to get your product in front of prospective customers and in front of your customers. And it's a special one that's not quite possible at the same level online. Even with all the personalization that we've had, even with all the automation, nothing quite compares to being in store and getting to touch and feel those products yourself. And so this is one of the reasons why some of the most unlikely players are actually now some of the biggest brick-and-mortar and retail players. People who started their businesses online, brands that started their businesses online over the past 12 to 24 months have really made news for opening vast majority of brick-and-mortar stores. Some of the names on this list are obviously well-known. Casper, their recent IPO, selling mattresses. Amazon, obviously very well-known. And many, many brands that have reached tremendous scale online and have had a bunch of success online. It's now well documented that they're opening stores, and it's for these exact reasons. Well, they've had a ton of success in e-commerce. There's still something very unique about the brick-and-mortar experience in that opening these brick-and-mortar stores are not only offering a new channel to distribute their products to their customers, but it's also raising the awareness of their brands in those markets and are being very, very effective. And so this is something that we've wanted to highlight, that this is something that's not being talked about. Online to offline and the problems that exist there is being talked about a lot, but something that's much less explored is the offline to online opportunity. one of the challenges that exists in trying to create this true omni-channel business, this online to offline and offline to online business, is that online we're very used to having a lot of data. If you're operating a digital brand today, an e-commerce brand, on your website and in your apps, you have a ton of data, a ton of observations. You can look at people as they visit your website. You can understand how long they're spending on your website. You can understand how effective your website is being at retaining them, at driving shopping cart sizes. You can profile different customers into different groups, and all of these result in different actions that you can take, segmenting your customer base differently, building different types of marketing strategies and audiences, retargeting folks, and of course, most importantly, measuring all of this. But the challenge in utilizing brick and mortar and retail is that you don't have the same level of consumer data or in-store data in a physical store location as you do online. And so what we see at Zenreach a lot of the time is that because brands don't have access to their in-store data, they either assume that their retail presence is not super relevant to their digital goals, or they assume that what they're seeing online on their websites is exactly the same thing that's happening in store, and so they try to approximate or assume that the strategies and data that they're seeing online is playing out in store. But this is actually a pretty critical mistake, because what we've seen at Zenreach is that this is certainly not the case. What we have in front of us right here is actually a real study that we've done at Zenreach, and the purpose of this study was to compare how do online interactions and online conversions convert to conversions in store for given campaigns. And so this is data run across many, many campaigns for some of our partners in the retail category. And what you'll see is if you look at the leftmost column here, who was targeted in these digital campaigns, you can see a particular split between the demographic makeup of men over the age of 35 and men under the age of 35. If you then go with who engaged with those digital campaigns online, you'll see that it roughly matches the target. So this played out online as we expected. We had data on who we thought would resonate with our brand online, and sure enough, those same people interacted with our campaigns, and those are the same people that our campaigns were effective with. If you take this one step further, though, in the Zenreach data, you can see that in store it was actually a very different split of who this particular campaign was resonating with. In fact, it was the complete inverse. So men over the age of 35 converted at a much higher rate than men under the age of 35. And so simply assuming that the data that you're seeing online in your digital strategies for your digital goals, whether that be app installs or sales online, using the data that's being effective there is only part of the picture. To really understand your customer base, you should also be looking in store. And so what would this look like? We've already talked a lot about how there's website visitors that spend a certain amount of time and might or might not fall off, and using all of this data to drive certain actions. What you want to try to do is do the exact same thing in the real world. Instead of website visits, there's store visits. Instead of page time, there's dwell time in your store. Instead of bounce rate, there's people who come into your store and don't purchase anything. And you can look at shopping carts in store and online. You can build those profiles and compare them. And then you take the same actions to drive the same goals, but now you're using a more holistic view of your in-store customers and your online customers, and recognizing that those are probably the same people, just with different purchasing habits. And you use that data holistically to come to your digital strategy. The biggest question that we have when we highlight this strategy to brands is, I already understand really well today how to do this on my website. I have Google Analytics. I have a lot of trackers. I'm building a CRM. How can I do this in store is typically the first question we get. The way that we do it at Zenreach is very straightforward, and it's something that anyone with a brick-and-mortar presence can execute on. But today you already have customers walking into your stores. And one of the great things about these customers today is they all have digital presences in one form or another. Everyone has a smartphone. And in Zenreach's case, every smartphone is searching for Wi-Fi all the time with a unique identifier. This presents an opportunity to capture some in-store data. So this is the first point at which you're going to start to identify those in-store customers the exact same way you might identify customers online. By logging into the Wi-Fi and asking for an email address or a phone number, you're then able to associate that customer with their digital device so that the next time that they come into your store, you know who it is, and you can start to build that visitation behavior in-store just like you do online. As that person comes back over time, you'll see them, you'll build that profile, and you can also add additional information to this profile as well. So if you have a point of sale where you're collecting email receipts today, that is additional piece of in-store data that you can look at. If you have a loyalty app where users are, or your customers are checking in every time that they come to your store, that is another data point that you can look at. And every time this person visits, you're building up this profile that ultimately you can then use online for your activity. And if you're working with the right partner, you'll not only be able to understand how this particular user interacts with a single brick-and-mortar store, but you'll also be able to understand how they interact in the real world across locations. And this brings us to maybe the last point that we have before jumping into particular use cases, which is that even with all the different in-store data that you're able to collect today, and it's significant, I think it's a big missed opportunity for a lot of retailers, adoption is always a challenge. And so if you're able to get a meaningful portion of people logging into your Wi-Fi, if you're able to get a meaningful portion of people requesting email receipts or signing up for your loyalty app, if you're doing really, really well, you might be able to get 5, 10, 15% of your in-store customers in your system and leveraging for your digital strategies. But if you work with the right partner, that partner can leverage their network of data. So those other 80% of folks that are identifiable to you today, a partner like Zenreach or some other technology partner might be able to fill in that gap for you so that you have full visibility into everyone who's visiting your store in the exact same way that you have full visibility into everyone who's visiting your website. And bringing all that data together is when you can achieve these great digital outcomes. So on that note, rather than continuing to talk about these conceptually and at a high level, I thought this might be a great time to hand it over to Couple, who has a lot of experience in digital, working with different brands and at different technology companies, and having him walk us through some very specific use cases of how to use the in-store data we've collected up to this point as part of your digital strategy.
Thanks, Kai, for that really insightful overview of how omnichannel businesses should really be leveraging both not just online signals, but also offline signals to build a very holistic marketing strategy. Before I get going, I just wanted to provide a quick overview of the topic. As Kai mentioned, what I plan on doing over the next 15 to 20 minutes is to make some of those concepts that Kai was just talking about really come to life. I would love for everybody who's actually listening to take away some of these real live examples so you can actually include that in your next upcoming marketing strategy or media plan and truly be a lot more effective and efficient in driving the outcomes that you really care for. So I've cherry-picked 5 use cases or strategies that I think everybody should be familiar, if not already using. And my hope is through each and every one of these examples, you're able to see how the partnership of both online and offline is what truly drives most meaningful value for true omnichannel businesses. So why don't we just get going? The first one I wanted to cover off is around segmentation. I think we all in present-day world are leveraging the online signals coming off of things like cookies or browser behavior or our phones and tablets, device signals to actually segment our audiences. Now, obviously, the combination of these segmentations are endless. A few that come to mind immediately are things like first visit, or somebody who's been visiting for a number of times, their nth visit, or to that point, actually somebody who's actually lapsed. The marketer, the online marketer, would take actions like, hey, new customer offer for somebody who's actually coming in for the first time. Maybe you should get a 10% off coupon to drive you to actually convert on your first visit itself, or a win-back campaign for consumers who've actually lapsed over time. That's something I think we're all very comfortable and aware of. What actually, as Kai was mentioning, is through the power of technologies like Zenreach's Wi-Fi or your point-of-sale system, you can really beef up your omnichannel marketing strategy and be able to segment your in-store audience in a similar manner, if not identical manner, to what you were already doing for the online space. Over here, again, same. Through these technologies, you're able to actually segment people who've actually been being identified as their first visit or their nth visit, or somebody who was already coming in has stopped coming in over the last, say, 30, 60, 90 days, and be able to target them through a very similar offer or identical offer to what you were seeing earlier.
And couple, one thing that's maybe worth pointing out here is that the reason why this in-store observation is so effective is because once you get a system like Zenreach set up through your Wi-Fi, those subsequent visits, you're able to do passive detection. In other words, it's not necessary for someone to log in each time they come visit your store. If they're in the network, you'll be able to detect them, and then you'll be able to merge that in-store behavior with the online behavior to have a true segmentation, whereas today you might only have the online picture. Do you have any examples maybe tied to category or brand of how you've seen segmentation play really well?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I absolutely 100% agree with you of how the holistic picture is very important through the network effect that you're able to see through technologies like Zenreach. So you asked for examples. I absolutely do have one. Zenreach has been working with a plethora of food and beverage locations in addition to our retail partners. And something that we've actually seen happen relatively often is our fine dining establishments that partner with Zenreach. What they're really able to do is through this segmentation, they're able to identify some of their most loyal users or visitors. And as Kai mentioned earlier, that loyalty that's visible, the storefront that's actually almost a billboard for the brand itself, what these fine dining establishments are actually doing is once they've identified some of these most loyal visitors, they want to engage with them and reward them for their loyalty that they're presenting to the brand itself. And something that we've actually seen with one of our partners is they actually host very exclusive events where celebrity chefs come in and whip up a really delicious meal for some of these loyal customers. The brand, what they've actually been able to do is now that they actually identify and are able to interact with these loyal customers, they drive them back to the website to actually have them engage, sign up, or buy tickets to some of these events where the interaction of the storefront segmentation with the online property is really helping them yield a much more holistic experience, with the hope that these loyal customers are getting so delighted that they're actually becoming influencers and a voice for the brand itself, and telling their friends and family of how delightful of an experience that they're actually having with the brand. So definitely think about this as a very holistic experience of how you can tie your online signals to eventually have them engage with both your online storefront as well as your in-store experience.
Yeah, and one of the things I love about that example couple is that it's not as if these fine dining establishments had no digital presence previously. In fact, they had quite a few. Every fine dining restaurant out there has a digital reservation system where they're obviously capturing a lot of customer data and are then using that customer data to sell these exclusive tickets, like you've said. But one thing we noticed is prior to Zenreach, that reservation system actually wasn't the best system of record for that visitation behavior, because you're only getting one person's name on that reservation, and it might not be the same person across groups. And so when we were able to marry that reservation data with the in-store data and the passive detection, we were actually able to see that there were a lot of loyal, frequent goers who would be interested in purchasing these tickets online. And so, again, a really great example of how marrying the two worlds enables better segmentation than one world alone.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the next example that I wanted to move on to was around more occasion-based audiences. I think everybody is aware, or if not, quick reminder, Valentine's Day is right around the corner, a couple of days away. And that's just a perfect use case for, as you think about the brands, and again, going back to the idea that Kai was talking about earlier, where he showed that chart of people who tend to be engaging with your online property don't always mirror the world that you actually end up seeing in store. That's a critical example that I think I want you to keep in mind as you think about more occasion-based audiences and the execution of that. So moving forward, as we mentioned, you already do have, through those cookies and other signals, you do actually have a very good sense of people who are engaging with your brand. And as a result of it, you're able to target and have almost a one-on-one exchange with those customers that are coming on to your website or your storefront or online storefront. Now, what's really important though is that occasion, the in-store front up till now has been missing for the brands, and if that piece is missing, you're sort of having an incomplete view of the world, and as a result, the execution will be sort of lagging to a certain degree versus what you would be able to do if you actually coupled the signals that you were seeing on some of these occasions for both online as well as offline.
And Couple, have there been any specific examples of occasions or time-sensitive promotions and strategies where in-store data might have evolved that strategy from just a pure digital perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Something that we have actually come across, and again, like I didn't mention Valentine's Day just as a reminder, but actually there was a very relevant case that I wanted to bring up for everybody is we've been working with a women's accessory brand, and over the holidays, there was a very interesting nugget of insight that we uncovered for the actual brand. So obviously, as you can imagine, this store that primarily only caters to women because of the products that they're selling, their typical buyer, as well as people who are actually visiting their website, tends to skew very heavily to the female audience. However, around the holidays time late last year, what we uncovered for this brand was actually the skew of, or the split between men and women actually came a lot closer around the holidays or preceding the holidays, and that's actually because a lot of the folks are actually looking for presents for their significant others around the holidays. Now, that's a really insightful piece of information that they didn't actually have prior to having some of these technologies in place. And even if they did, to Kai was mentioning earlier, your loyalty apps, again, may not actually give you the full view because people who are signing up for loyalty apps are people who tend to buy very frequently, whereas more generalized systems like Wi-Fi technology or point-of-sale systems are able to give you a larger view or a broader view of the world, where they're able to tell you not only who's actually visiting the store, as well as who's actually purchasing in your store, or what are the products that they're actually engaging with within the store itself. And so coming back to the example that I was mentioning earlier, this brand was actually able to take that insight or that nugget that prior to the holidays, men were actually shopping for their significant others, is something that they're actually taking now and acting on for this Valentine's Day period, where they're actually running a very specific campaign tailored primarily to men to drive awareness and engagement and overall eventual conversion for the brand. In addition to, obviously, they're continuing to do their standard, their typical, their evergreen executions around driving awareness and pushing folks down the purchase funnel for women itself. But that's another interesting nugget that was really helpful and was not available to the store prior to some of these technologies being in place. And
Yeah,
Kai
I
actually
love
asked
this.
about, sorry. Yep, go ahead, Kai.
Yeah, I love this example because I think that it really shows, the goal, a Christmas or a holiday campaign to purchase products, the goal really didn't change, right? What did change was the insight that even during the holiday period, their loyal customer base is continuing to go to their website. But in store, there are a lot of people in store who maybe, and men specifically, who aren't familiar with the brand, but are in the neighborhood, are in the mall and walking around and looking for gifts. And so they were able to take that exact same goal, that exact same budget, and allocate it slightly differently for this specific occasion.
Absolutely, absolutely. A really quick one, actually, another one that comes to mind that may not be exactly occasion-based, but around a similar theme is with time of day of week seasonality. And something whether we actually noticed with a hardware store was they tend to see spikes in traffic to their website on Monday through Wednesday, or more early part of the weekdays, versus their in-store traffic tend to spike obviously over the weekend when your adventurous home improvement folks are actually in store trying to buy a few things to continue with their projects. Now, having that understanding of how their audiences actually differ from online to actually in store is, again, a very useful piece of information that you can then take and in a similar vein to what we were talking about segmentation, you can actually go and act on this, and now you can create different cohorts because your in-store is actually slightly different from your online visitation website audience. But just another example of how occasion or seasonality-based audiences should also continue to be very holistic in both taking a view of both the online world as well as the offline world.
Very cool. Very cool.
So the next one that I wanted to touch on was, I think, something that probably each and every one of us has either heard of or absolutely has leveraged at some point in our marketing careers, and that's lookalike audiences. I think lookalike audiences should not be foreign to most of us, where we're really trying to build seed audiences for some of our most highly valued folks, some of our most highly valued folks to drive new prospecting for and drive new customers to our website or our in-store. And so the idea and the concept, I don't think I need to necessarily speak to that so much. But I think what's really important, again, over here is the fact that what I was hinting at earlier for occasion-based and what we found for one of our women accessory brands was the fact that your audiences do tend to vary across the two channels, and I think it's really important to continue to keep that in mind because as you think about building a exceptionally strong seed audience that can be leveraged across any of our operational platforms, whether it's email or whether it's or search or display or social, it's really important that you're using the right signals because it's almost like a bad signal will result in a bad lookalike, and as a result, you're missing out on an opportunity that you should be leveraging at the end of the day. And so the ability to really identify and have visibility into those coming into your store really adds that additional layer to building exceptionally strong and holistic seed audiences that tend to drive the most meaningful outcomes and help you plug that gap that may exist otherwise if you were only using online signals.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things that's evolved in the lookalike audience space is that now lookalike audiences, whatever you're seeding it with, a seed is not a seed is not a seed. In other words, you can really start to weight and skew your audiences towards, your highest value customers in the seed all the way down to less valuable customers so that these lookalike systems know how to weight the eventual audience. And so, what we would say here in this insight is that if you think about a set of customers to your website and to your business, you might today be weighting your lookalike audience towards people who frequent your website a lot. And you might have an individual in that audience who has only visited your website one time. But if that person has also been into your store multiple times, we at Zenreach would say that's actually a really high signal of intent. And in some ways, you should actually be weighting more towards that type of visitation behavior. But only when looking at both of these signals can you really truly understand the omnichannel customer and what's going to result in the best possible lookalike audience. And I guess the follow-up question here, couple, is that, what is the best lookalike audience is often, I think, up for debate because these are, by definition, they are generated audiences. What have you seen in terms of the right results to look at when evaluating whether or not a lookalike audience that's built purely on digital signals versus a lookalike audience that's based on a joint online and offline signal? Where do those results really start to show up?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, and something that we've actually seen. I think this is a common metric that's available in the industry. Is a lot of times visitors don't often, when they come in the first time, the repeat visitation or repeat purchase is not so easy to actually happen with the retail space being so competitive or the food and beverage space being so competitive. Trying to get somebody to come in a second time isn't actually as easy as that we all tend to believe that if they've come in once, they're going to continue to come in. In today's space where consumers are constantly inundated with advertising and communication and offers, it's easy for them to be distracted and forget your brand and move on to a competitor. And so it's really important for us to really look at that frequent visitation, because what we've seen is that frequent visitation tends to also then obviously be correlated with highest lifetime value of that customer for that brand. And so as a result of it, you really should be focusing on those frequent and often visitors to drive the most lifetime value for your brand over time, because as the customers come in, what we've actually seen is the more times they come in, their overall spend also tends to go up with your brand over time. And so that's a really meaningful value or metric that we should be aiming for as we think about operationalizing the marketing strategy and keep a focus on lifetime value in addition to the visitation trends.
And I think that's a key insight, actually, just generally for lookalike audiences, whether it's in an omnichannel strategy or just in any strategy, is any of these derived audiences, the platforms involved, they're really incentivized to optimize towards engagement. So you could have two lookalike audiences, and one might have lower CPCs than the other, or you might have lower CPMs on one, but that doesn't really mean that that lookalike audience is more effective. And what you really want to look at is that driving lifetime value with your brand. And so to your point, Couple, it's very intuitive that someone who's frequenting not only your website, but also the high barrier of frequenting your stores, those are likely to be really high lifetime value customers for your brand down the road. And so even if the traditional metrics are maybe a little bit more expensive to get in front of those customers, in the long run, those are the customers that are going to be much more valuable for you down the road.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. So I have two more left, and the next one that I wanted to cover off on is also, I think, hopefully is fairly familiar and something that we're all paying a little attention to. In addition to all obviously driving new customers, every brand wants new customers, but a big one, as I mentioned earlier or alluded to earlier, was the fact that once somebody has come in, there's oftentimes that they tend to lapse, and oftentimes the lapse tends to happen following the first visit, but that's not the only time customers tend to lapse. They can lapse at any given point. Like I mentioned, they're inundated with promotions and marketing and interactions from your competitor brands. So you always have to stay on top of your game to make sure you're turning your first-time visitors into frequent visitors, and over time turning them into loyal visitors. And so, as I mentioned, loyalty, online behavior, you want to continue to sort of keep a track of folks who have interacted with your storefronts, whether it's online or offline. And as a result of it, if you do tend to see lapse happen, I think we should be, if not already, acting on that through various promotions or very targeted messaging to actually reach out to these lapsed customers and re-engage with them to bring them back into the store and really remind them of the delightful experience that they actually had the first time. You can do exactly the same with some of the technologies that we've already touched on, including Zenreach, to actually be able to interact with your storefront in the identical manner. The fact that our network allows you to understand who's actually come in and what their visitation trends has been over the past time really allows you to understand where the lapse is actually happening. In addition to not only that, actually, I think it's a really useful way for you to understand if somebody is actually aware of your brand and your products, they may actually stop going to your website, but are continuing to come into your store. And so, or vice versa. It's really important for us to have a holistic view when you have two separate storefronts, one online, one offline, to have a more holistic view of the person that's interacting with either storefront, to have a full view of understanding where the lapse is actually happening, so you can tailor your messaging to that use case in a much more intelligent and knowledgeable manner.
And Couple, I know that it's quite common for us to see e-commerce brands or digital brands believe that they've lapsed customers because they're no longer interacting with their digital products, but in reality, those customers are still showing up in store. The brands are just blind to that, and as a result of that, they're misunderstanding how to treat those customers.
That is exactly what we've actually seen with some of our brands that we've been working with. And to give you an example, we've been working with a coffee brand where layering on the in-store visitation data on top of their loyalty app data allowed them to actually understand dormant behavior that was being exhibited. An example to further go along on this thing is they had noticed that some of their users had actually stopped using the actual loyalty program. But what was really interesting was that when we actually overlaid the in-store visitation data, they actually saw that a lot of these customers were actually continuing to come in, but they just weren't actually using their loyalty app anymore. And as well as obviously some folks who had actually stopped coming in. But the reality is now that you actually have that insight, you don't have to attack both those cohorts in a similar manner, but actually do so in a much more strategic manner to say, potentially drive a custom offer to drive them back to the actual loyalty app, or vice versa, right? So it's really important for us to have that visibility that was really helpful for this brand to then create the cohorts and distinguish between those who've actually stopped coming in versus those who have continued to come in but have stopped using their loyalty app, and be able to actually interact and re-engage with them accordingly.
Yeah, and I think that that's an example that probably every retail brand can relate to. So many retail brands at this point have, a VIP category or a loyal category in their customer base, and they assume that if that category is no longer interacting with that program, that they've lost that customer. That might not be the case. That customer might be coming into their brick-and-mortar locations on a regular basis. And so it's just a matter of figuring out how to leverage that in-store experience to drive those digital outcomes again. Couple, we might have lost your audio there. Are you muted?
Yes, I apologize for that one. So really quickly, Yep, absolutely. Last one is around growing loyalty. I think we were already just talking about loyalty in our previous example, but one of the things that I wanted to also mention is your online behavior should be coupled with your offline behavior to really truly get the most out of your loyalty program and get the most users to sign up for that user base. And having visibility into that in-store audience is really important, because if not, you're missing out on that opportunity to get those people to actually sign up for your loyalty program otherwise. And so that's really important as you think about building and reaching a loyal set of folks and users. You need to incorporate both promote awareness, not just through your online channel, but also through your offline channel, meaning your storefront, to be able to get these folks, the same folks, to actually sign up, because the audiences may or may not be exactly the same. And you definitely don't want to miss out on that frequent visitation when the interaction could be happening at either location.
Yeah, and this has got to be, I'm glad we ended on this one, because this has got to be one of the number one goals we hear from brands and advertisers is they want to drive app installs, or they want to drive adoption of a program like a loyalty program. But when we get to know them, typically they're only using digital data because that's all they've ever had. And we know that it can be a real challenge to drive adoption of a first-party app or program. And this is a strategy that we've seen time and time again bolster what the brands are already doing. So, couple, I'm sure we have at least one example of a use case like that.
We absolutely do, and I think you started to touch on that third-party app use case. Something that we've actually seen with one of our quick serve restaurant chain partners is they obviously started out with partnering with third-party apps, but then soon realized that they were paying a fair amount of of cost or sharing that revenue that they were generating with these third-party apps. And the problem that they were dealing with is how do they not only mitigate the cost down, but also be able to drive the word out if they choose to then build something that's more in-house or incubated within in-store or within the brand itself. And it definitely was a success story for this brand where they ended up creating a first-party app, in-house app that they drove signups and growth for through both their online storefront as well as their in-store storefront, and really allowed, most importantly, not only to actually get off of the third-party apps, but actually create a much more customized experience for those actually coming into their or interacting with their brand, because the control was much more in their hands now versus the third-party app, and so they can have a much more tailored interaction with various people, again, going back to creating cohorts and so on and so forth. But doing so really allowed them to have the most reach as well as engagement and drive higher lifetime value for the customers by moving off of third party to a first party app to build their loyalty program.
Very cool. Yep. And so I guess in summary, the key points to remember is that, as an omnichannel brand or as an e-commerce brand today, you're likely using a lot of digital signals to drive online outcomes. But a big missed opportunity is also using your in-store data to drive online outcomes as well. The challenge there is that you might have a blind spot today. You might only have data on your online customers. And so how do you address that in-store blind spot? And the insight that Zenreach would provide is that you actually have a bunch of in-store systems today that can be brought together like Wi-Fi to act as almost like a real-world cookie, if you will, to then be hooked into your online systems. And if you work with the right partner, you'll not only be able to leverage your in-store data for that purpose, but you'll also be able to leverage a passive network of data, people who are in your partner's grander network to reach not just 5, 10, or 20% of the people that are in store, but 100% every time they come back in. And if you can achieve that, then you can really start using your in-store data to complement your online data to ultimately drive online results. And so with that, those are prepared remarks today, and we'd love to open it up to questions, Christopher.
Great. Thank you so much, Kai. Tremendous presentation, and we have indeed a huge number of questions. And believe me, if we can't get to all of them, we'll definitely get back to you offline to answer your questions that you've had. So one of our first questions from an attendee is about measuring walkthroughs using Wi-Fi. And I throw this back to both Kai and Koppel. Tell us a little bit more about the accuracy of the technology, how you measure walkthroughs using Wi-Fi, and how does it differentiate between someone walking by, because we all know about that, the coupons and the stuff like that, and someone actually walking in the store?
Yeah, great question, and a little bit of a different theme than what we've been speaking about today. So for those on the line who are primarily e-commerce or digital-first brands, a walkthrough is a term that Zenreach coined, which is an in-store result. So rather than a digital result, it's an in-store result that you can drive. And what it is it's a visit from a patron in the Zenreach network that has been impressed by a digital impression or some sort of digital communication in the last 7 days, and then on a one-to-one basis, we're able to measure that person then ended up in store within 7 days. And so that's what a walkthrough is. To address the question of how does that work and the accuracy of it and the differentiation of it, one of the ways that Zenreach approaches this problem that is very, very different from anything else you'll see on the market today is rather than using third-party data that's out there on the market through apps or for purchasing, we actually recommend just using the in-store data that you already have. So you already have a Wi-Fi system in your business. You already have a point-of-sale system or a loyalty system. And because those systems are in-store, they're going to be the highest fidelity and most accurate representation of whether or not someone was actually physically in your store or not. In addition to being higher fidelity, because they're your in-store data, you're also going to have a lot more controls over fine-tuning what exactly constitutes a visit and what doesn't. In the case of Wi-Fi and Zenreach, what we do is we look at a number of different signals that are available to the Wi-Fi access points, the hotspots that are already in the store. So you already have these in these stores. And we can look at things like time of day. So we can look at your store hours and understand what do different devices at different times of day look like. We can look at the dwell time of a device. So if a device is just walking by your business, they're likely not to sit there for some time, and so we can look at that. We can also look at things like the signal strength of the device, so how close is the device to the hotspot. And then we can also look at the type of device. So is this an IoT camera or a car just driving by, or is this a smartphone that's likely in someone's pocket? So we use all of these different signals, and we're able to configure them on a store-by-store basis so that when we see Wi-Fi data come through your system to ultimately measure a walkthrough, we're confident that the person is in your store rather than just walking by or across the street. And so great question. One of the reasons we feel it's the most accurate is because it's actually in your store, and you're able to actually, tweak these knobs, whereas some of the other solutions out there are third-party, are maybe a bit of a black box, and are not really in-store data. They're things that are reliant on other apps.
That sounds good. We've got actually two intriguing questions from different attendees, and they both concern pop-up stores. One of our attendees asks how you leverage the Zenreach capabilities and data, obviously, with people that come into these pop-up stores, which are, a month or less phenomenon, either in a mall or in an empty storefront. One of our other attendees asks, again, about meaningful data using the Zenreach platform for such a short period of time. Could you both explain this pop-up store experience and how it works there?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question because I think it highlights a lot of what we've discussed today. So if you think about a pop-up store, it might likely be that this brand actually has a digital presence and is moving a lot of product through e-commerce today, and they're experimenting with pop-up stores in different markets to hopefully drive awareness in those markets. They also have a very interesting problem in that they're only available for a short period of time, and so the window in which they can collect customer data is actually quite small. And so we would say this: first of all, leveraging a solution like Zenreach or something similar, I actually think is very appropriate for this use case, because not only is a pop-up shop a great opportunity to sell product, but then anyone who's interacted with that pop-up shop at a later date becomes a great prospect. So people who are already familiar with your brand, they're a little bit further down the marketing funnel, they're going to be a much higher likelihood to convert online at a later date. Maybe they don't convert in the pop-up store, but they can convert at a later date online. And so we would highly recommend, regardless of how you do it, collecting that in-store data, knowing who showed up to the pop-up shop is a really, really good strategy to then go re-engage those prospects online. With respect to the short window in a partner like Zenreach, one of the benefits of working with a partner like Zenreach would be if your shop is only going to be open for 2 months, you might not be able to collect a ton of customer data yourself at that shop. If you're getting 1 in 10 people who walk in to provide some information, you're doing great. But if you work with a partner that already has a large network of users, already has millions of people across the world who are part of their network, then what that means is if one of those people walk into your pop-up shop, if they're already in the network, they're going to be passively detected, which means even if you miss out on collecting their information, there's still ways for you to engage with that customer later through the platform and through leveraging the network. So I think it's a really great use case, both because pop-up brands typically rely heavily on digital outcomes when they're not running pop-up stores. And I think it's a great use case because a pop-up store might not be able to collect a bunch of customer data, and so they'll be reliant on data partners like Zenreach to let them know who showed up to their pop-up store so they can re-engage them.
Sounds great. And listen, just a note to our attendees, we had so many great questions that we're just going to go a few minutes over time just to see if we can get some more of these questions answered by Kai and Koppel. Gentlemen, one of our attendees asks about dealing with people who visit a store and then purchase online. How does your technology then track that store visit back to the online conversion? And how do you do that? What's the technology there, and what's the advantage of doing that? Obviously.
Yeah, I think one of the great things about Zenreach's approach is that we're actually already piggybacking on a lot of the technology that has existed in the digital space and the e-commerce space for some time. And one of the core technologies that exists out there is CRM onboarding. And what that allows you to do is if you have, if you're an e-commerce brand today and you have a set of customer identities like email addresses, you can upload those or onboard those into your advertising partners to then activate them on the networks. And so all of that infrastructure already exists today. What's great about Zenreach is that we're actually collecting those identities in store. So in other words, we not only see all the devices that are coming into the store, but for anyone that's in the Zenreach network, we also know that those devices are associated with a particular email address. And so we're able to hook our data into that existing ecosystem to drive an online conversion in the same way that would happen in an online-to-online environment. So if you, say, activate a media campaign, we see a bunch of people walk in store, we're able to recognize a lot of those devices, and we have email addresses associated with them. We can then use our advertising partners to onboard those identities, those email addresses, and then monitor on your e-commerce platform whether or not any of those people who did end up in store ultimately end up back on your website at a later date or on one of your digital properties at a later date. So that's how the data flow happens. But the good news is that we're piggybacking on technology and infrastructure that you're probably actually already using in your e-commerce strategy today. It's just that you haven't hooked in the in-store data component of it just yet.
Fascinating.
And I just wanted to add to that, one of the interesting things this is couple was that when I used to work at my previous life at Clorox, one of the most interesting insights that a brand like CPG will be interested in is the consumer journey. The flow that Kai just outlined really allows brands to have a much sound understanding of where the interaction is happening. Is it website to then an email to then an ad to then an in-store visit, or what the order is? And as a result of it, you can really understand the value of each of those touch points that were previously sort of unavailable to you, or you would have to spend a lot of consumer research to actually time and energy and cost to actually understand that. But this technology allows you to actually do that and be able to map the entire consumer journey end to end and their ongoing consumer journey to really build out a much more informed view of how each of your touch points is actually helping drive consumers down the purchase funnel.
It sounds great. Koppel, thank you for those concluding remarks. Well, we've reached the end of our time. Thanks to everyone for attending Ad Age's custom webcast sponsored by Zenreach, and we went over time because it was just so intriguing. We had so many questions. If you haven't gotten your question during the online webinar, we'll get to you afterwards and follow up offline. Now, one of our attendees also asked about whether we'll get the presentation on demand. Yes, you will indeed. So keep your eyes peeled. You'll receive an email as soon as the archive is ready, and you can download it again and for those great results and the insights of Koppel and Kai. On behalf of our guests today, Kai Umezawa and Koppel Mohan from Zenreach, thank you for your time. Have a great and prosperous day.